Thanks for joining us today to talk about osteoporosis. My name is Dawn Richards, and I'm joined by Tom Rankin, who's in Kamloops, and Maureen Smith, who's in Ottawa. They're both individuals who live with the diagnosis of osteoporosis, and I'm going to talk to them a little bit today about what it's like to live with it, get them to bust some myths for us, and also give you some of their own kind of life hacks about living with osteoporosis. So we really hope that the video today helps you if you live with the diagnosis of osteoporosis, or maybe it can help a loved one who you're a caregiver to, or just a friend to, or a family member to, and really help them out with their diagnosis as well. So let's get started. I know each of you have had a different experience related to your diagnosis. You've lived with it for varying years. Maybe Tom, I'll start with you to talk a little bit about what led you to your own diagnosis, and then we'll take it to you, Maureen.
Thanks, Dawn. I'm fairly new to the illness. I was diagnosed last March. Over the course of my life, I've broken a few bones, but they go back to when I was 14, and they were all impact injuries, skiing and skating and so on. My physician a number of years ago decided when I was 62 to establish some baselines. So we did some blood work and pulmonary function, heart stress, that stuff. In June of 2019, I had a fall in my backyard while we were trying to move some pieces of slate, and I broke my hip. So I talked to my GP and just said, maybe we should establish some baselines here as well with bone density, because I've had breaks, although they're spread out over many years. So we did that, and back came the diagnosis. So I've always lived a fairly active lifestyle and a very healthy diet, but my mother had osteoporosis, and both of my sisters have osteoporosis. So despite my lifestyle, I've apparently been beaten by genetics. I'm on a medication that I take weekly. There's one that you can take every 6 months, and once the pandemic clears and I can do an office visit, I'll likely make that switch, although I don't have any issues with the weekly medication. So lifestyle changes, I'm as active as I ever was. I downhill skied a whole bunch last winter, 25 times. I still get out on my bicycle. I still get out on walks. I'm just a lot more cognizant of the risk of a fall. And I've made some diet changes. I'm a lot more aware of calcium content and vitamin D. I eat a lot of yogurt, I eat a lot of broccoli, I eat a lot of kale. But yeah, so that's kind of where I've come since March.
Okay, thanks, Tom. What about you, Maureen? I know you've lived with osteoporosis for quite a bit longer than Tom.
I have, and when Tom said he was surprised by his diagnosis, that's exactly what happened to me. It was quite a shock. So in my late 20s, I was teaching grade 6, and I hurt my hand playing volleyball with my students, and my hand swelled up. So I went to a walk-in clinic near the school, and the doctor, very nice young doctor, walked into the room with my x-rays to put them up on that chart that board that they used. And he said, "Oh, oops, I have an elderly lady's x-rays here. I'll be right back with yours." A few minutes later, probably 5 or 10 minutes, he came back and he said, "Well, actually, those were your x-rays, and the rest, as they say, is history." So that was how I got my diagnosis. So why so young? Well, I have a rare endocrinological disease that was diagnosed in childhood, and I was one of the first Canadian patients treated for it. So the fact that it would cause osteoporosis at such a young age was not known, so they weren't looking for that. The good news is that now more is known about my condition, and osteoporosis will develop in these people at a much later stage in life. So aside from the steroids that I have taken since childhood, which would definitely be a risk factor for osteoporosis, I also have it in my family. So my mother had fairly severe osteoporosis, and she fractured her hip. So medication management is quite interesting because I'm looking at a 32, 33-year period. So I witnessed the evolution of the diagnostic tools, which are, lovely now. They're non-invasive and very, very quick to get the diagnosis, the treatment, and the management. So for myself, I've had a variety of treatments, the whole gamut from, and I can just say that for now, the treatments that they have and now are not so much of a burden to take. And for me, they don't have any side effects. They don't really improve. They don't really, they're just not difficult to take compared to what the first treatments were. The tests are accurate and non-invasive. And for the management, well, there's a great deal of information and support available. So for example, in Ontario, where I live, you can apply for a free government program where an occupational therapist comes into your home and assesses your risks of tripping and falling. So I'm just waiting to reach age 65. I'm not there yet to qualify so I can make my appointment. I did have an occupational therapist come in and help me with one of my fractures, and her statement was, are you trying to create a labyrinth in here? So I think that those kind of management tips are really great. There's support groups where you can meet others with the same condition, and there's all kinds of specialized exercise classes, and I've done a lot of those. Probably the one that was the most impactful for me was the one on balance. So I don't have very good balance, and I really learned a lot from that, and I'm sure that saved me from many falls.
Okay, so one of the things that was really interesting about what both of you talked about there is there's almost like a bit of myth busting you're doing here. So Tom, you're a man, you're 1 in 5 who lives with osteoporosis. And I know we've talked a little bit about how, that was fairly surprising, even though your family lives with it, you've had lots of fractures. And, Maureen, you were diagnosed fairly young. Again, there's some genetics there, but, those two things seem fairly important. Is there anything you would like to kind of impart to other people about osteoporosis that only someone living with osteoporosis would know about? Just kind of open up a little bit about what it's like living with it, and maybe where you go or suggest people go for credible information, how you work with your healthcare providers or important people who are part of that healthcare team. Tom, can I go to you first again?
Oh boy. Well, I think just the lack of awareness of this disease in the male population is the biggest aspect. When I was, as I said the other day, I was gobsmacked when I got mine. I read the report and I saw the word osteo, and I just thought that it was written as something they were looking for in a man my age, when in fact it was the diagnosis. So I actually went to I had a GP for a bunch of years, and he retired. I went and talked to him, and I've since talked to my current GP, who has a shared practice with another fellow, and they're all up around my age. None of them know of another man that has this diagnosis. I do know a fellow in the Lower Mainland. We've met through Osteoporosis Canada, and they do have some kind of a support group down there, but there's nothing where I am. There's nobody even to connect with, because nobody knows of somebody else. So I could form a group and have coffee with myself, I suppose. But so I think for me, that's the biggest thing is educating men to ask for the test, and educating the medical community that osteoporosis does exist in the male population, and more so than people seem to realize.
Okay. Maureen, how about you? What's a little bit?
I like to tell people that it's an invisible condition, and that's particularly difficult for people who are diagnosed at a younger age. And from what I hear from Tom, it's probably difficult for men too, because we're not expecting it. You have to be very careful about the activities that you choose, depending on your level of osteoporosis. And sometimes others just don't understand why you're not participating. So one of the schools that I taught in, everyone was into mountain climbing. And also I wanted to be with them, to be with my colleagues. And, people didn't really understand why I wasn't joining in. And I thought, well, I had a pretty good reason. So So for me, one of the things I would like to share is that I do worry about falling and fracturing my back, because I have had 2 back fractures, or fracturing my hip. You know, you have to find a balance between protecting yourself and becoming overly concerned and anxious. So I think that's something that people don't realize how difficult that is. You're constantly weighing, you know, risks and benefits. I think it's important to understand the consequences of a fall, and so that you can take care of yourself. So one of the beauty of having a condition that affects many people is that there's plenty of information out there, there's plenty of research, and there's general knowledge about the condition, especially for women. And so you can start with Osteoporosis Canada. That would be a really good place to get really credible information. I also like to read what are called systematic reviews, and the best site for that is Cochrane. So systematic reviews are a summary of all the evidence available on a specific topic. So for example, what is the best exercise for osteoporosis? Or so for example, when my doctor said that I would really have to stop running, I went to Cochrane and made sure that there was evidence to say that I probably shouldn't be at the stage that I was at. So the last thing I would recommend is that there's several decision aids that you can use to assist you in making decisions about your osteoporosis care and management with your healthcare team. So it'll guide you along and give you the questions to ask and how to really engage your healthcare team as your partners. And I would recommend those really highly.
Great. Both of you have mentioned Osteoporosis Canada as a place for great resources. And you've talked about, Maureen, you've talked about Cochrane and reading the scientific literature. What about your healthcare teams? Tom, you have a GP. Anyone else that you go to for advice or to have a conversation to get credible information?
When I first got the diagnosis and we decided on a medication, I had a conversation with pharmacists at 2 separate stores. So that was very helpful. My mother had osteo for quite a while, and my sister, well, basically both of my sisters have been terrific sources of information from different angles because they have different backgrounds. So that's it. The pharmacists and family have been my other sources.
Okay. Maureen, anything else you'd like to add there, or any other places
so
you'd
like
send people?
like Tom, I have great faith in the pharmacists and in the advice that they give. Through my 30 years plus, I've also heavily engaged with physiotherapists because I've had, you know, when I had the fractures, occupational therapists to help me, and a health psychologist when I was much younger, and I had to accept all of the changes that were going to impact my life. That was really important too. And I have one doctor who's basically, you know, is the one who manages the osteoporosis, but I also talk to my general practitioner about my osteoporosis. She often has something to add or something to say that's interesting. So it really is a partnership, and I think that all together they all come together to each play a different role, but all very important.
And you're kind of the person that pieces all those bits of information together to see how you can best use it, I guess.
That's right.
Okay, well, we're stuck in the middle of a pandemic, which is a really interesting situation. I guess I wanted to explore with both of you, especially as we head into winter. Can you talk a bit about how the pandemic has affected, or maybe it hasn't affected, how you deal with your osteoporosis and your care? And Maureen, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
So there's definitely been an impact on my osteoporosis care for me because the pandemic makes it more difficult for me to do anything that involves interacting with other people. So due to my primary condition, I'm immunocompromised. So things like group exercise classes, using the pool are really out of the question. And as Tom mentioned, how the importance of exercise, I also believe in that. And walking is great, but now that winter's coming, I worry a lot about slipping on the ice, and I find that very stressful. So my two back fractures were caused by slipping on the ice as I was leaving an aquafit class at our community pool. I can't seem to get that out of my head. So I have to admit that on some winter days, I don't venture outside due to the ice, but before the pandemic, I would have had replacements for those activities, which I don't have. As far as my care goes, I mean, osteoporosis lends itself well to virtual or phone visits. So I don't think my physical care that way has been impacted. I had a bone densitometry test just before the pandemic, broke it in mid-March, so I'm covered there. And I did run into a problem when I was due for an injection, but my family doctor did take care of that.
That's great. How about you, Tom? Has the pandemic affected your approach at all, or your care?
Not really. I'm fairly early stage. I still went for bike rides. I still go for hikes. I still take my dog out for walks. We're changing now with winter coming, but I'm going to be downhill skiing again. And just to increase my options, I'm going to get back into cross-country skiing. So I mean, people that I did those things with, I can still do them with. Yeah, so it hasn't really affected how I've made this adjustment.
Okay.
I think how it's affected is more, well, Maureen's comment about the invisible. Like I still do all the things I always did, but when I walk out the door now, I'm more inclined to watch for ice on the stairs than maybe before. Or I might pay a little more attention to what the surface of my driveway looks like. People around me wouldn't notice that, but I had to climb the ladder the other day to look at my solar panels. And climbing up a ladder is one thing, but getting off the roof back onto the ladder is different. And there was a definite nervousness making sure I had solid footing getting back on that ladder. Nobody around would notice, but it's certainly a change in thinking.
I was going to say, it's always kind of in the back of your mind. You're a little bit more hyper aware than the average person would be, hey?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So what advice do you have for others who live with osteoporosis, basically? And you've talked quite a bit about, being your own advocate to get the diagnosis. What about from the exercise and diet side, Tom? You've always been super active. You've eaten fairly well. How has that maybe changed, or have you adjusted on that front if you've had to? I hear there's lots of kale in your future.
There is. Yes, and I grew broccoli in my raised bed as well. Well, I think what's changed is the guilt factor. Some days it's you just sit at home and I don't really feel like going for a bike ride, or I don't really want to go walk, and the weather's not that great. And so now there's a need to do it. There's a real reason to make sure that every day or most days there's some level of weight-bearing exercise. Okay. So it's a positive motivator in that sense.
Maureen, how about you? What advice would you give others?
So my best advice is to really be fully involved in your osteoporosis care. Knowledge is power. The day that you get the diagnosis doesn't mean that you turn into a porcelain doll. You need to understand your condition. You need to see. So when I say understand your condition, also which level you're at. So, there are varying degrees of osteoporosis. You may be just at the very beginning where you can still do a lot of activities, or you may be, at very, very high risk where you have to really cut things down. Seek answers to all your questions, and there's no wrong questions, and then make the decisions that you have to make to maintain a good quality of life despite having osteoporosis. I think Tom and I are probably good examples of people who've maintaining a good quality of life. I mean, my approach is really to see it as a partnership between your doctor and all of the other healthcare providers that I mentioned. I'm an active participant in my care. I think you have to be realistic and adjust your activities to avoid fractures, as they can have a huge impact on your life. And, the silver lining to osteoporosis is that there are definitely advantages to being forced to adopt self-care. So taking care of yourself, leads to all sorts of benefits in your general health, both physical and mental.
That's a great note for us to wrap up on. Tom, what's your silver lining to osteoporosis? I always like to be optimistic about things.
Oh, I think Maureen's point was bang on. I mean, I still have a little secret stash of chocolate in one of my kitchen drawers, but I do definitely watch that my diet is healthy, that I'm active, that I watch how I move around. But I went out yesterday and cut, split, and stacked a half a cord of firewood. So it's not slowing me down. It hasn't changed my day-to-day lifestyle. It's changed how I think about it. It's changed how I manage some aspects of it. But most of the people I know don't know I have this diagnosis. They've seen no change in the Tom they always knew.
Okay. So in closing, I'd really like to thank both of you, Tom and Maureen, for sharing so much information about your own experiences with your diagnosis of osteoporosis. And we really hope that this can help people out there. I know that's a major motivator for both of you is to do a bit of myth busting, to get out the word that, you know, you're still living well with osteoporosis, but it's important that people do know if they have it and they take proper care of themselves. And really, we hope that this can help people out there, whether they live with osteoporosis themselves or they have loved ones who do. So thanks so much, Tom and Maureen.
You're welcome. Happy to participate.